Hey friends, welcome back to my kitchen. It's just in time for coffee and trying something a little different. Usually I go to the shops for iced coffee, but I've got my own here today, and I've got to say it's pretty good, and it's still really hot in Nashville area, so I am enjoying this, and I am looking forward to our conversation today. So come on over to the table and let's get started. Well, I've been looking forward to sharing with you. It's been a while, and I have had a few days of not feeling real great in the last month, but also I've spent a lot of time in prayer and in study for this lesson. I can't begin to give everything to you because, of course, like most of the end times prophecies, it's quite in depth. But I have just felt the need to, especially as I see things in the world just gaining speed, of bringing Israel into our place of discussion and study. And so I'm going to start sharing some names with you as we go on, people that you can get on YouTube and you can go as far into the subject as you want, and people that I feel that are credible. They come from, if you are wanting to study from that line of Hal Lindsey, and Tim LaHaye, and those that took a mostly literal position on this. That's where I have learned, and those are the teachers. There are amazing teachers out there that continue to teach along that vein, but they have expanded, and they have spent half a lifetime, some of them, studying this and praying over the scriptures. But this on the Jews. If you don't understand what they have to do with it, it's really kind of hard to understand why there's a tribulation. I mean, the church is going up to the Father's house with Jesus and to celebrate our relationship and get prepared for eternity. But why a tribulation? Why is it just God pouring out his wrath on the world? No, there is much more to it than that, and that's where our Jewish friends come in. Going back to the Old Testament, most of us are aware that the Jewish nation, the Israelis, those were God's chosen people. They are the elect. He chose this nation. Abraham. The covenant was made with Abraham, and he looked out over and he showed Abraham all this land, and he said, as far as you can see, that land is for you and your seed, your descendants and their descendants. And he made a covenant with him as the father of this great nation. And that was the nation that he would create a bloodline through, from which he would have Jesus be born into. But the Jewish nation is special. But the Jewish nation has made some huge mistakes along the way. So that's all. This will come into play. When he spoke to Abraham and gave him the blessing, something we need to know. He not only blessed his generations, but he said, those who bless you will be blessed, and those who curse you will be cursed. That has played out among the generations ever since. That is playing out today among our nations. And there's very few who are blessing Israel. But we have been one of them under the lead of President Trump more than ever. He has been a friend to Israel, and we had been allies for years. That was diminishing a bit, but we have come back to being their friend and blessing them. And it's so important that you understand they are God's elect. Remember that term. that's going to come back to play here in a bit. But they were the chosen. I think that I want to go to a scripture in Daniel. Daniel is so rich, and we haven't spent a lot of time there, but some, and I have spent a lot of time there, because Daniel it's like the revelation of the Bible. I mean, it's got all this description of the end times there, and there are some things that God shared with Daniel and why he chose him. I want us to look at that sometime, because if there's something there to really speak to us. The Israelis, we are aware how they not just made mistakes, they would become rebellious against God, they would disobey God. It's hard, but it has been hard for us to understand how they could do that, and yet when I look at what has happened to the church in just America over a couple hundred years, our church really seems to need revival today. There is much that needs to be done and needs much to pray about in these times as time draws short. But as we know, in the Old Testament, the children of Israel, they would get on track and then they would turn, and God would send them prophets and he would send them leaders. But inevitably, they would take a bad turn again. And bad turn is putting it mildly, to the tune that God would send them into exile. And they would be brought into Canaan, and then they're back in exile as they turn their back on God. So here's what happened. Here's where this ties in with us today. During this time of one of the times of exile, God said to Daniel, and bear with me here, because this is the tricky part. We get into numbers, and I'm not a numbers person, but what I do like is numbers are kind of black and white, and you can't fudge on them. They say what they mean. Some people call this cracking a code. There's no code to it. It's just numbers. And so I finally found this teacher that explained it well to me, and I'm not going into near that detail, but here's what I'm trying to get to. God told Daniel, he said, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people, the Israelis, and your holy city, Jerusalem, that's God's holy city, to finish their transgression, to make an end of sin. Now, this was one of those times that they were way out there, that Israel was way off base again. And here's what God says. He says, 70 weeks. Now, something you have to understand right away is that's not 77-day weeks. A week represents 7 years. Each day is a year. So when he's talking about 70 weeks, he's talking about 70 blocks of 7 years. Now that doesn't make sense. Let's see if there's a better way of putting it. 7 years in 1 week times 70. So it's actually 490 years. So he said they've got this much time to do this, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make an atonement for iniquity. Remember, they're way out there again. To bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. There was no temple again. So you are to know and discern, Daniel, that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now we know in this is to find that there was a decree made to them to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And you'll find that in the 2nd chapter of Nehemiah if you want to go back and find. It gives the month, the time, everything. I mean, it is very specific as to when that decree was issued. And so this 70 weeks or 490 years decree will be issued. And they've got that long, 70 weeks, 490 years, until Messiah, the Prince. There will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And in that time, it will be built again. The city is to be rebuilt. The walls are to be rebuilt. It's going to have the plaza, the moat. It's going to be rebuilt. The city is to be restored in the 7 years. And then in the 62 years, then the rest of Jerusalem, or the temple was to be built. And all that, from the time that decree was made, and we're talking about 490 years, all that started with that decree. Look it up, month of Nisan. You have to have an understanding, which I don't, but there are those, fortunately, who do, of the lunar years that came into play back in that time, of how the calendar was. It was not way off, but it's a little different. So you have to understand that to actually come out with this. But when you look at that, and it says until Messiah the Prince, if you look at when that started in Nehemiah and you add those weeks to it, or actually the years to it, it comes out, you'd think it would come to the birth of Jesus, but it actually comes out to when he came in to Jerusalem. It's the Passover. When he came into Jerusalem, it's Palm Sunday. He came in as King of the Jews. They had from the decree till then to rebuild Jerusalem in the 7 weeks, and then finish the temple in the 62 weeks. And it says it will be built again. But there's one problem there. I mean, unless you're really into numbers, it probably didn't come out. Probably didn't hit you, as it didn't me in the beginning, that 7 weeks and 62 weeks from the time of the decree till Jesus coming is not 70 weeks like he was told there would be. There's a week left. He's saying those things will all be accomplished, and when Jesus the Messiah comes, then that time clock comes to an end. Up until then, that's their time to get things right with God, to get their city and their temple, get everything back right with God, up until Jesus comes. And then the time is finished, but there's still a week left. And a week is actually 7 years. Is that beginning to ring some bells? Because it should. And then listen to where it goes. I mean, that's the basics of that particular scripture. There's a lot more you can read in these other books of the prophets. But 68, 7 weeks to rebuild the city, 62 on the temple. That's 69 weeks. Where's the other week? It says, okay, it's cut off then. But then it says, after that, the 7, and then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. There's two different things here, but very interesting. Again, stick with me. The prince who is to come, as you will see in another sentence in a minute, is the Antichrist. So he is the prince of the world that is to come. And the people of that prince will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now, sitting where we sit in history, that wouldn't have said to Daniel and the people then what it does to us now, because we know who in AD 70 destroyed the city and the sanctuary. It was the Romans. And this is saying the people of the prince who is to come. The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city. And we know they're the Romans. So if they are the people of the prince who is to come, this is why most people, there are other little things that say different things, but most people, because all of this is so accurate. I mean, in the Bible, it's either accurate or it isn't. And this is right on. And so most people believe that the prince that is to come, the Antichrist, will not necessarily come from Rome, but from that Roman Empire. And now it would be the revised Roman Empire. There's whole lessons in that we don't have time to get into, but that's something that you can watch today. If you really want to see how things are coming together in prophecy, you watch what's happening in the Middle East. In the Middle East, in other parts of the world. And so this revised Roman Empire it's in the making. We have, that's also the European Union. We have withdrawn from that. Am I right that England has? There's a lot going on in there. And so this is the main scripture that leads people to believe, since it says, the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and we know who did that. Well, then that we know where he's coming from. He will come from the revised Roman Empire or the European Union, that area. We're not going to be here, folks, to actually see it. And we're not to be looking for the Antichrist. We're to be looking for Jesus. But we do get clues along the way. We know of people who would like to have that one world order position. We know some of them from the European Union that would like to have it, but we don't know who they will be or who that guy's going to be. We will find out one day, but we won't have to find out by experiencing it. Now let's get back to this. So the people, the prince who is to come, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And then if you go down to verse 27, it's still talking about this prince who is to come. And you've heard this. We've referred to this scripture before. And he, that prince, will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. What's 1 week again? 7 years. Here's the 7 years that is left. There was 1 week, 7 years left for the Jews to come back around to God, to make things right. And this Antichrist will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, for 7 years. And then it goes on to talk about how he will change. I mean, this is the Antichrist, how he will be in the middle of the week. Middle of the week, that's the middle of the 7 years. He will change things. That's a lot, isn't it? But let me tell you, you might want to even go back. When I'm watching other people's videos, I'm doing a lot of rewinding and going back and checking the scriptures. And you might want to do that with this. That is just touching this in Daniel. But that's a huge scripture. And those are some very important truths that you find there. So that's the 70 years. That's the week, the 7 years. That tells us why we're having the tribulation. It was left from the 70 years. It's the last 7-year period. It was left from the 70 weeks that were assigned for them to get things ready, to make things right, to make an end to sin. Now they've got a final 7-year period that his wrath is being poured out. Listen, when I go back and I look at how they defiled his name, and the Bible even tells us this isn't just about bringing them back to God. He does love them. We know he doesn't stop loving people, and he doesn't change his promises. This week is promised. There are some that think since Jesus came, the Jews are out and we're in. It's all about us. The promises to him were all fulfilled with Jesus coming, but we can see that's not exactly right. There's things he said that have happened since then, and there's this 1 week, this 7-year period that's still promised. But the Bible does say that he is coming to make his name right. That the Jews, in the way they were his people, and all the nations of the world knew that the Jehovah God was their God, and they had seen the way he worked. I mean, he was a real God. And when they would turn their back on him, it was such a defilement against him and his name. And this he's bringing back so that the nations of the world will see once again that the God of the Jews, God Jehovah, is real and alive and he moves today. He is clearing his name. Do you know, I don't have a bit of a problem understanding that because this is God. His name is everything. Now, if you have ever been in a position, well, you've all been in a position that people have said, you've gotten wind that people have said something or somebody said something about something they don't like about you, because you do know not everybody likes us. I mean, I know that may be hard to believe, but not everybody likes me, or at least likes everything about me. And they don't you either. So that's not a big surprise. I mean, we don't like everything about everybody else. But if you've ever been in a position where you felt someone was saying things that was against your name, against your character, they were actually attacking your character, not just something they didn't like about you. That's a whole different ball game. That is not only hurtful, that can be damaging to a person. And the God, the creator of the universe, his chosen people, would defile his name more than once before the nations. And it ended with the coming of Jesus. When they rejected his son, how is that for defiling a name? Defiling who God is among the nations, because they were his people, and they're not having it his way. They're not having Jesus. So God's name needs cleared, and it does. I mean, if anybody should have a clear name and people should understand who he is, it is the God of creation, the God who loves those chosen people, that elect, the God who loves us, the Gentiles, the ones who were not Jews, but we came to accept his son. He loves all of us so much. But he must have a clear name. And that is the main reason he's coming with this tribulation, to set things straight. He is going to clear his own defiled name. And he is bringing the news to the Jews. It's about the Jews. It's about reaching the Jews and bringing them back to God. And that would include bringing them to an understanding that Jesus is the Messiah, God's Son. So that's a huge, huge thing. And that's what this 70 weeks is about. But when you get into it, oh, whoa, that's only 69 weeks. Where's the other week? Wow. It's how many years? Almost 2,000 years, or it's just about now, almost 2,000 years down the road. And it's time for that last 7 years. That's what it's all about, guys. And that's why we're being taken out. That wrath of God is thousands of years old. And it is something that that nation will need to shake them, so to speak, and bring them to their knees. Next time we get together, guys, we are going to talk about prophecies specific to Israel and the Middle East. Because if you want to really see how things are heading up, you must have an understanding of what's going on over there, because that's the timetable that will trigger things. And so we will look at things that have happened, that have gotten us excited in the last couple decades, and gotten us into end times prophecies and understanding them better. But we're going to look at what's on the horizon. Most agree that we know what's coming next over there. So we will look at that. We'll talk a little bit about, what does the United States have to do with all this, or does it have anything to do with all that? So we'll get into that. This is a huge part of Bible prophecy, and we are so involved in our own crises over here that I know I have to go find the Israeli stations to find out what's happening over in the Middle East, because we've got our own problems here. But we're going to talk about that. It's exciting stuff. It's important stuff. So take care. We'll talk again soon. I love you guys.